Okay, guys, before we kick off the podcast this week, a couple of quick announcements that we're putting on our, I guess we put it on our e-letter, we put it on Instagram or what have you, but a few changes after I went to the mastermind event down in the south coast of the UK yesterday, which was, what bloody day is it today? I don't even know. Tuesday, that was the one. And we spent some time talking about how we can optimize things with the Whole Man Academy. And one of them was probably to do with being more focused on exactly what the Whole Man Academy is. So what we wanting to understand was exactly where we were targeting our content, what were we concentrating on? So we came up with the three things, which is strength of your mind, body, and soul, the health of your finances, relationships, and your community, and your confidence in your purpose, your actions, and your path in life. So the strength, health, and confidence. So all of our content will begin to be, and if it already has been, but it'll be focused very much on those areas. So we'll be publishing more about it. I'd love to get your thoughts on what we've missed out, what you think the three things we're focused on: the strength, health, and confidence. And the other thing is we're going to swap to podcasts. Instead of being every week, are going to be every 2 weeks. So that gives a little bit more time to find epic guests, to make sure the content is great, to get it edited, get it out, to provide value for all the guys that listen all around the world. And also takes a little bit of workload off whilst we focus on some other aspects of the Whole Man Academy. So podcast every 2 weeks, still going to be on a Friday. So you'll still get your Friday pump of excitement for the Whole Man Academy stuff. And again, it'll be strength, health, confidence, and everything else that we can think of in between that ties those things together. Anyway, that should be it for now. And again, as I always say, please like this video if you're watching it on YouTube. If you're listening, remember to subscribe to our podcast Ola to make sure you don't miss out. And what was the last thing? Of course, is subscribe to our e-letter. Goes out to men all around the world, and it is wholemanacademy.com/movement. And the other point there is you get an awesome free download, which is a really cool brainstorming process to help you kind of reinvigorate yourself if you've ever had those times you're like, man, feeling a bit meh at the moment. Anyway, right, let's jump in.
Whole Man Academy, because the world needs strong men. Whole Man Academy is changing the game for men around the world. It's for guys who want to live an epic life of fun and adventure, no matter what. We believe deep down, all men want to go on their own hero's journey to becoming resilient, confident, fearless, and fulfilled. Listen in to be inspired by guys who don't settle for living a life of mediocrity. This is your call to action and call to adventure. Are you ready?
Okay, so this is the Whole Man Academy podcast, episode 107. My guest today is David Vaux. Now, I'm going to check if I pronounce his name right, because usually I cock it up. Is that even close?
That's spot on, mate.
Good. That's a win for me. It's a feather in my cap. Well, David is second-generation firefighter in the London Fire Brigade. He was a recruit physical training and fire training instructor. We're going to get onto that. He's now osteopath with a special interest in strength and movement, which is super important for us, especially for the guys listening around the world who are interested in, optimizing their life, their body, and their movement. He's also founder of the Move to Improve method. We're going to talk about that. Also going to get onto risk, pain, fitness, marathon rowing, toxic workplaces, leadership, reinvention, and fatherhood. If we have time, no promises. So we're not short of content, David. Let's put it that way. So how are you and where are you, mate?
Thanks, Anthony. I'm very well, thank you. I'm in sunny Kent, which I know you're familiar with. Been here about 2 years now, which is a really lovely spot. So yeah, all is well and the sun is shining, so not going to complain.
That's the one. I mean, for us, guys that are living in the UK understand what our weather's like. It seemed like a very long winter, so there's no complaints apart from that our water butts are already dry. After a couple of days. But even at lunchtime, I think I said before we started recording, I managed to take about an hour where I had lunch sitting in the sun, and then I did some exercise in the sun, with your feet on the grass. So it was lovely. But I was going to ask you, one of the questions I often ask guys, I tell them who we're going to have on the podcast, and I kind of either put it on Instagram or I send a few guys kind of messages saying, any questions? And one of them was a good one, which is, when was the last time you really pushed yourself? So let's start with that.
In terms of training or in any aspect?
I guess any aspect. He's probably looking at, when I said that you had an elite level of fitness, it was like, as we get older, me, when was the last time I pushed myself? Good question. I know what it was. I was down in East Sussex at a Warrior Day and I nearly died, but I didn't. So what about yourself?
I think it's all relative. At the moment, I'm actually into kind of, one of the reasons I contacted you is that I was looking to kind of connect and get my message out to people who are interested in performance, be that physical or, professional or emotional, but certainly people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Because performance ebbs and flows, it has seasons, doesn't it? And I think for me, I was performing at a very high level as what's been called now a tactical athlete. I'm not sure if I don't know how I feel about that, but certainly it wasn't called that. You just, you're a fire rescue and that was it. But that was a high level. I was a high level rower. And then for the last kind of 20 years, I've maintained a really good level of fitness, even within the parameters of having persistent pain, neuropathic pain and injury. In terms of pushing myself physically, relatively speaking, I went to visit my son who lives in Wales over the weekend, and pushed myself quite hard there. Actually, I was kind of leading the way, and he's 18 and fit as a butcher's dog.
Yeah.
And I was, ego took over, and I pushed it. We were like grinding uphill for 2 hours, and I felt it the next day on the drive home. I was so stiff, and I was thinking, wow, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But I think in those circumstances, you're always going to be, because there is nowhere to hide. To get from A to B, no one's going to do it for you in those circumstances. And so I enjoy occasionally testing myself like that. I think it's important to have the reserve to be able to do that kind of thing if you don't live in the hills, etc.
Yeah.
I think today is a interesting one, isn't it? Because you reached out to me a few days ago. We've obviously spoken, but this came up, and it would have been quite, because I was in London today, it would have been quite tempting to say, let's leave it a few weeks, Anthony. I know, I'd love to do it, but I'm not sure I'm available. But I thought, no, actually, push myself. Let's do it. It's an opportunity. Let's see where the cards fall.
That's one of the big things. I mean, yesterday I was at a mastermind event for men down in Winchester, and the travel time. I always say this is the problem with people working from home now, is that maybe they don't get that break from that travel time where you get time to sit and think. And for me, it was that I knew the question the guide asked about when was the last time you pushed yourself, and that for me was a couple of months ago, where I went to a warrior day, as we called it, and at the end did a workout session. And do you know why? Because I had competition, suddenly I found a new level. Whereas I bet if I'd have been on my own working out, you'd have said, "Oh, that's enough. I'm too tired. I can't do anymore." But when you've got someone, either running behind you or closing you down or something, it makes a big difference. And I think that's important, to push yourself, to challenge yourself sometimes, to see where your limit is. But let's flip back to many years ago when you were when you started as a firefighter. So tell us firstly why you became a firefighter and what it was like kind of getting, into that life, because that is one hell of a life to lead, because there is a large amount of risk involved as well.
I applied when I was 17. I left school, did some various kind of outdoorsy type jobs. Wasn't classically academic. I was later diagnosed, much later in my mid-20s, with dyslexia. So I found it quite difficult, and there was a good reason why. I mean, I came back to academics later, but knowing what the challenges were, I was able to formulate a plan to succeed in that world. But at 17, I didn't have any of that. So I was kind of quite interested in either the emergency services or the forces. I applied for several, and the fire service wrote back first. I kind of grew up around fire stations. My father was stationed in Southeast London. He did 30 years and retired. And so I was kind of quite familiar with the types of people that would be his friends, and the types of people who would come to our house, and I'd go to the station. And there was a certain smell to it, a certain familiarity to it. And so when I applied, I thought, yeah, this is me, this will be good. It's kind of, I'm tailor-made for this. And actually, my application was accepted, and I joined, a few days after my 18th birthday. And it was the hardest 6 months of my life, man. The hardest 6 months of my life, because I was 18, I was immature physically. And I mean, I wasn't mature. We have to get to our 20s and into our 30s to really kind of gain that strength and maturity and stamina that I think takes, if you ever built stamina from scratch, it kind of takes 18 months, 2 years. to get to a point where you can perform, I think you have to put all those pathways in. So I had 6 months, and I did have youth on my side, but I was, my first day at training school was scary because, I was the youngest by 6-7 years.
Oh, right. That's big.
I was surrounded by ex-military types, mature guys, some of them ex-special forces who had rotated out of that and decided to become firefighters. And it was a steep learning curve, man. I mean, it was, I didn't realize until that day. And then, 6 months in, I was still struggling, physically still struggling. And it was a real leveler because it's a meritocracy in the fire service. Everyone has to go in at that level.
Yeah.
Everyone starts at that level, and you have to work your way up if you want to work your way up. So there's a real understanding of every element of the job, and it's a very physical job. There's a lot of skill to master in terms of equipment, in terms of all the things we have to know about construction and pumps and rescue equipment, and the basics of just your own ability to wear breathing apparatus, and steep learning curve. And it was pointed out to me very quickly on day one by my chief instructor, who was a bit of a legend, really. It was like meeting someone with special powers. He was 45. His name was Dave Smith. He was a station officer, and he was a rock star, man, because he used to be able to run a marathon under 3 hours and bench press 300 pounds. And his party trick was going hand over hand with his body out, like almost like in a plank, hand over hand up a pole in a fire station. And it just like a lot of the other guys who were very fit looked at him and said, who is this guy? And he was our instructor, and he's the one who set the levels. He's the one who actually set the parameters for what he felt was, he wouldn't let you pass out unless he would want to work with you himself.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. That was the beauty of it in those days, in that people rotating into training generally had that mindset that I'm going to be here a couple of years, then I'm going to rotate back out, and you're going to be on the station probably I'm in charge of, and I want you to be as good as you can be. So it was very much protecting oneself. But it was a high standard, it was very, very formal, very militaristic, and it was 6 months of hell. I mean, literally. I think I enjoyed the last week of it when I knew I'd passed everything and I was going to get out of there.
Yeah.
What
did your father think of you going into fire service? Was he happy about it, or I guess he'd done 30 years, so he knew what you were going into? But
it's a good question. He was mixed. He was mixed because he knows the reality. He couldn't protect me from the reality because he had protected me from the reality. He didn't tell his son, all the stuff that he'd seen and had to do, and near life, near death, rescues, and when it went wrong, and all the PTSD that back in those days there's no support with.
Yes.
So he was mixed. He was proud of me. I know that, as was the rest of my family, but he was quite mute on the subject. He kind of said, well, it's on you.
Yeah.
Which was interesting because I've got two sons, one older son, a younger son. George is 18, and George is really interested in maybe even doing some kind of retained fire service stuff. I think he wants to go to uni, and he will probably, but I don't want him to. It's a funny one. I'd be proud of him, but similar to my father, I would be thinking, I know the reality. People think it's glamorous. It's a great job, and it's a privilege to serve people like that. It truly is, and it's a privilege to experience some of the things you experience, literally birth and death often if you're on the front line. But I wouldn't want him doing it at this age. I think if he said to me I was 25, Dad, I'm 25 now and I want to experience it, then I'd say, okay, mate, well, you're mature enough now.
That's exactly what I was going to say, was if it was in 5 years' time where maybe he'd lived a bit more and seen how the world could be different. Well, I wonder, I was going to ask you also about, because I've interviewed now we're up to over 100 different men. A few of them have been special forces and things like that, where there's a risk to life daily if you're out on the, let's call it the front line, etc., etc. And I just wonder for you, because when I've interviewed guys in the special forces, when they've joined young, they said they haven't even crossed their mind about the fact that you might, basically you might pay the ultimate price for your job. And I wondered for yourself, because, was there that thought in the back of your mind? And B, also, did you ever have a time where you actually feared for your life in the job? Because I guess you're only one mistake or someone else's mistake away from a serious incident.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I think to get through the training and to prepare yourself for the realities of it, I think it's kind of there. There's an implicit risk to it, and I think we're all aware of it, but it's not really spoken during training. We train hard, and there's a reason why we train hard, is because your life depends on it. It's kind of the relationship is spelled out, but in that regard, but you don't really go into, I didn't personally go into thinking about, oh God, what if I, get off that ladder and slip, or what if there's an explosion, or the ceiling caves in. I don't think it's until you've had a few near misses that you start to think about it. I had near miss on my first night duty on duty ever. Yeah, it was my first night duty, and had a very odd shout to a young man who was quite distressed. He was threatening to jump off of Chelsea Bridge, right? And he was up on the central column, and the station officer turned to a guy called Tim, who was a climber, and said, "Tim, you're a climber. Get up on the turntable ladder and then inch across and see if you can speak getting down."
Great.
And Tim turned to me and said, "You're quite, you're the new guy. Come with me. This will be a good experience." But in those days, mate, I mean, we're talking about an old iron, wrought iron bridge which has been painted over for hundreds of years, and even the big bolts you'd think you can grab a hold of are just kind of, there's nothing there.
Flaky.
He had big gloves on and big rubber kind of wedged boots on, which gave zero grip.
Yes, you got.
So we're literally edging out onto 100 foot above the Thames at 1 a.m. There's all coppers down there and the fire service, and there's this young man who's really distressed, and he's got a noose around his neck, and he's going to jump. And Tim turns to me. We're about 2 yards from him, and Tim turns to me, and we're literally kind of like this, trying to. I'm desperately trying to find some purchase, and he turns to me and said, "Dave, I'm offering him a cigarette. Take an undergrip on my belt and hold on to there." So I was like there, undergrip onto Tim, and Tim started to edge across to this guy holding a cigarette as an offering. And at that point, everyone stopped and looked, because it was precarious.
Yeah.
If we'd have come off, then we would have both fallen 100 foot into the River Thames, and I don't think we would have come up.
Yeah.
And I had that decision to make, that I was kind of very aware, as he offered him the cigarette, that this could go badly wrong. And what he hadn't told anyone, he's going to grab him when he gets near enough. And that's what he did. And as he got within hand distance, the guy took the cigarette, and Tim grabbed him by the wrist. And there was this moment where everyone just froze. He looked at Tim, Tim looked at him, and it was a decision this young man had to make. Is he going to go for it, or actually Tim called his bluff? Are you going to come back with us? And he decided to come back with us. But for a second or so, I was frozen in time, thinking, if Tim goes with this guy, because he'll go with him, I'm going to, or do I let go of Tim and hold on? So it's one of those real strange juxtapositions, because I don't want to die. But I decided that I decided I'm going. I'm going to try my best. I'm not going to let go. I'm going to try my best to hold Tim, but which means I'm going in. Yes. There's nothing to purchase, man. And that was my first night duty.
Wow.
And then we climbed back down the ladder with this young man. He got nicked, which is terrible, really. Should have been given.
Nice.
He got like really roughly handled and nicked and stuff. And I mean, I'm not judging. The police had a really tough job, but I just thought, he needs psychological support. I hope they took him to hospital anyway.
Yeah.
But, we just went back to the fire station, made a cup of tea, and no one really talked about it. And I was sitting there, my eyes like that, thinking, and I hadn't actually thought about it that much until you're out.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a survival mechanism kicking in. Because you think if every night's going to be like that, you wouldn't come back to work. I don't think so anyway.
The hit of adrenaline, it's not like it's a 1 second thing. That kind of job, you are, it's a prolonged period that you're, reacting to something. So it must be pretty exhausting when you then come back and just try and, I say, decompress. But then I guess sometimes you might then go straight out again.
That's the weird thing about the fire service, is that you can be on a shout like that and then come back, and then you can be in for an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, and you get another shout. And the worst is when it's in the middle of the night. So they used to allow us to just kind of get some rest after midnight. From midnight till 6, you can stand down and just kind of, you can do what you want. So a lot of people would kind of try and get their head down. And if you're in a sleep and the bells go, there's a sickening drop in your stomach, just through the sheer bolt upright, and you've got to move, and you go down the pole into your kit, onto the fire engine, and often within 60 seconds you're out the door, depending on how quickly you can turn out. And you feel that, and then you hear what it is, like if it's a person's reported fire, multiple calls fire, or a road traffic accident, person's trapped, you kind of have a real buzz of adrenaline, and there's this raw feeling. And sometimes you get there and you're turned away, so you're ready for action, and then it's dealt with. There's enough people there, they've dealt with it, and then you're turned away, and then it can go again, and it is exhausting. It's exhausting in that adrenaline pathway. And I think that plus the sleep deprivation is plays havoc, I think, with a lot of guys, and girls, and I think that they struggle with that. It is a job of adrenaline, and it's a job of roller
coaster.
Yeah, and it's a funny one, because when I hear soldiers or armed forces talking about PTSD, and the kind of adrenaline rushes that they got during combat, I guess that's the equivalent of our combat. The difference is, I guess, and this isn't a competition, it's just different. The difference is that our battlefield is our local communities within which we live. We will walk past. I mean, I was up in a conference near Oxford Street, just near off Harley Street, a place called the King's Fund, last week, and I walked up Oxford Street, and I stopped, and I thought, this is weird. I recognize this piece of street, and I realized why. The shop front hadn't changed, and there was a really nasty RTA there, which I had to attend. And for that moment in time, for that few hours when someone was trapped, the whole world revolved around that piece of pavement, and there's nothing there. That person unfortunately passed away. There's nothing there. It was a traumatic experience for everyone involved, and it was weird, because I thought, oh God, I literally haven't been back to this part of and I thought, and it took me there. In effect,
you have that.
It's reliving it. And that's the battlefield for us. There's a reason why a lot of ex-first responders, rescue workers, police, paramedics, will struggle with maybe my fiance really takes a piss out of me because I drive really carefully. But there's a reason why I drive. I didn't always drive carefully. I was like any other teenager, man. But now I drive carefully. It's like almost like comically so. But it's because I know what goes wrong, and it's part of that, where that's part of what I experienced in terms of trauma has affected I've dealt with a lot of it, but I think you'll be a fool to say that it doesn't affect you if you do something that young. And things like, I could be eating dinner and I just suddenly can't eat it. Because that's another weird thing that happens in the service, is that you're eating your dinner, and then you get a shout, which is a call to something, and your dinner's there, so you put a plate over it and you put it in something called the hot plate, and you hope that it's not going to be a long shout, and you come back. You could come back from something really gory, and then you've got to eat your dinner. So I have an association with food sometimes where it reminds me of a certain smell or something, and I hear from some people who have obviously served as well, that's not uncommon. But it's hard to explain that to people, to your loved ones, because you don't want to tell them why. Why would I want to tell them why I can't eat that?
I was just thinking, I mean, one of the reasons with the Whole Man Academy is about encouraging guys to talk when, doesn't have to be that they're emotionally vomiting over people all the time and online and etc. But it's like, if things are challenging, or you just, it's good to get around other guys to talk things through. So we know generally guys aren't great at talking anyway, let alone, as you said, when you've got harrowing things like that to discuss. Who do you go and talk to? Because you certainly don't want to be unloading that, I guess, on your family.
it's not the family. I honestly don't think it's for the family to unpick that for you. I think you've got to do that with a professional, or a trusted associate, whatever that may be. I would even say friends are good, especially if they've experienced that with you. But even so, if you've got a friend who hasn't experienced that, that's a bit much for them sometimes. So it's difficult. I think trying to find a neutral, non-judging circle of support is important. There's always someone you can speak to. There's some great stuff out there now, helplines and therapy services for people like me now, and for the general population as well. And that's great, because that wasn't the case 10 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly. I think people are more willing to talk now.
I think there's certainly more options, and there's more options that are achievable, because I would say back when I worked in the city, I think like if you had an issue, there was like one really wanky helpline which no one was ever going to call, and that was it. Whereas now there are a lot more kind of opportunities to find what works for you. But that takes me on to, so going from the young lad who then kind of grew into being a fireman, then you started kind of realizing the elite level of fitness through your role there. So talk to me about the times when you were, you say at your fittest, when you were, mixing old school functional fitness as well as everything else.
Well, when I was a recruit, that hard 6 months, it was all old school functional fitness. We got beasted. I mean, it wasn't pretty, but it worked. You know what I mean? It's just hard work.
Yeah.
We did circuits, old school circuit training. We did something called the Filthy 15 and the Dirty Dozen, and we had to do it, and we had to, complete it in a certain time. We were climbing, lifting equipment, climbing, putting it through obstacles. It was like an industrial obstacle training. Wearing your breathing apparatus, something as simple as what we call hose running, where you've got hose and you run it out, you connect it, and then you coil it and you roll it back. It's brutal in fire gear.
Yeah, but
heat and humidity training, brutal. But all our fitness, all our PT in those days was functional. I got fit slowly. When I got out of there, I kept that fitness and then worked on it and then matured, and I took up rowing as well, which really helped. And then I got my opportunity to go back, if I wanted to, as a physical training instructor after about 4 years operational. And I wasn't necessarily happy on my first watch. It was quite a toxic workplace, and we can come on to that later. But it was like my ticket out of there. It was the best thing I ever did, because you suddenly realise that one of the best things you can do if you're in an environment like that is it's almost impossible to change it from the inside as a junior. I think, if you can shift across and then work out whether that was an odd environment or whether you're the odd one, and being an odd person is fine, but being an odd environment is not. And I think that's the key. So you've got to kind of chop and change a bit to see where you are. But anyway, I went back to training as a PTI, then got really fit. That was my whole job, was training recruits, testing, are you fit enough to come in, and then getting them through the 6 months. I hadn't long just got through myself, and so it was my job to then beast other people, which I thoroughly enjoyed. It was great, mate. I mean, you're getting, in a tracksuit all day, getting paid really well as a fitness professional, and you got to do kind of co-collaboration stuff with other PT departments from other sections of the services. So we used to kind of do, fittest challenge with the police, the Marines, all sorts of other services, and that was great. So there's an opportunity, and again, really functional. So things like rowing are functional, but it was a variation on the similar theme, where we'd get people to run. We would run down down the Thames embankment with telegraph poles in 2 squads, and we'd get into the local parks, and we'd go, up, over, get the pole up. We'd all brace the pole, and then someone would have to climb up it, and then we'd go again. And then we'd run to the next park, and we'd do 8 or 10 miles. And it was called the rocket run. Not allowed to do it anymore. In fact, the whole training thing has changed, but it was like a rite of passage.
Yeah.
You had to get through it, and good times. And so that fitness also was honed really in wearing breathing apparatus. I was also a breathing apparatus instructor, and what we call a real fire trainer, which is where you take people to purpose-built facilities where you basically heat that what was a mock-up of either a ship or a plane or a house or a warehouse, and you'd mock it up to have a very hot fire, and then a crew would have to enter and then locate the fire, put it out, and then exit with a casualty. And you'll be standing there making sure they didn't collapse or making sure it was hot enough. And some of the people I worked with in that role were mad. They definitely breathed too much smoke, because it was just, I'd never experienced any heat like that in real fires, let alone training fires. And I think that remains the same. I mean, people's visors were melting.
Wow.
But what I would say about that kind of element, if you've gone through that, I think that's how training should be.
Yeah.
The reality should be easier than training.
Yeah,
and
you can cope with that.
When you think about recent events, some of those personnel, some of the fire personnel who had to go up multiple floors in heat at the limit of human endurance, probably would have no doubt benefited from that really hard training they were given. No doubt. You fall back on training when you're in situations like that, and that's what training's for. But I certainly felt at the end of my time as doing that, I was also a PT, I was also a breathing apparatus instructor. When I rotated back out to a new watch, I had the luck to rotate out onto a fantastic group of guys who were very like-minded, so real, kind of functional athletes. We were doing CrossFit before CrossFit was a thing. We were doing it, but it wasn't called anything. We were tire flipping, sprinting, we were climbing rope, we were doing pull-ups, dips, and all in a circuit. It was very functional. And the station officer at the time was great, Bob Jones, a bit of a legend really. He allowed us, this is at Kensington Greenwatch, he allowed us just to train more than we usually were allowed to, because you could see he had people who, his life was good in that regard, because the worst thing is having lazy operators, and we were all good operators at the time. That lasted about 2 or 3 years, when you could look across every person, and think, we're all able to pull our weight, literally pull your weight in a rescue situation. And I think for me, in terms of when that was manifested, so I remember going into a person's reported apartment, a fire in an apartment, and we were told that there was a mum and baby in there, and we were the first ones there, and it was myself and a guy called Steve, and we had to search. Well, we didn't have to, but we needed to search it as quickly as possible. It was a 6-bedroom apartment. It was huge, and we did it, and we did a thorough search, and we actually identified the fact that they weren't in there. But walking back through that flat afterwards, seeing all the scorch marks and all the smoke damage, you could see where we'd been, because you do it in a certain way where you leave a trail where your hands been and your feet have been.
Right.
And it was in terms of a breathing apparatus wear, that, it wasn't even a live rescue, but for me, I remember remembering it. That's why I remember it. Thinking we were on point there. We were breathing efficiently. We were adrenaline ducks. We thought there was a casualty, and it was a child. We were properly kind of heightened, but within that we had control, and that was quite, for me, it was like, okay, I've kind of fulfilled my potential in terms of, this is where I need to maintain now. Because I know how that feels, and anything else won't be good enough.
And isn't maintaining, I know after speaking to lots of different guys who've in their own field have achieved a high level of fitness, and I'm pleased to say I did it at some point, but often maintaining it isn't necessarily difficult because of your mindset, but because sometimes injury sets in and it kind of sets you back. So what brought your kind of career to the end with the fire service?
Injury. So I had about 3 or 4 years at that watch where it was just living the dream. It was great. It was a great experience. And and I'm privileged and honored to have had it. But then, I think what happens is, I had multiple injuries. So I had my first disc injury, and it was a very awkward rescue. Sometimes you just can't lift properly, and you've got to kind of get your body into awkward positions to extract someone from a equally dangerous position. And I remember I was at the bottom of we had a big casualty kind of scoop, we call it, and we kind of braced them in and we tried to get them up. And this person had fallen down a sub basement. And you get in London, don't you, where you go down 2 floors and they're right at the bottom of a spiral staircase. And so we had to come up a spiral staircase with this thing, one on the front, one on the back, and I was on the back, fully extended. I remember after that, something didn't feel right. And then a few days later, I started getting referral and I had a scan and it was a disc injury, which I nursed back to, I nursed myself back to some kind of form. But from that point onwards, whenever I did anything vaguely athletic, I had a pull or a niggle in my back. And then unfortunately, I was injured again. And that's what's led to further MRIs. And at that point, I was basically told in no uncertain terms that you can't be operational anymore.
Yeah.
And, I'd in those days, they weren't redeploying people. They were just saying, okay, you can either do the job or you can't. So that was that. And it was that quick that the decision was made. I did try to linger on, but I kind of knew that, so I did this non-operational, I was kind of non-op and I hated it. It was like dying, after those sorts of experience. And in the end, I was also just struggling with pain. I was in a lot of pain at the time. I had 2 or 3 disc prolapses and I had damage to the vertebral bodies themselves. And the nerve that had been pressed on, the sciatic nerve that had been pressed on by the original disc injuries, was not getting better. So, I was on morphine, I was on gabapentin, and looking for some help via the medical route, which was basically, we can do surgery, but we don't think it will help you. I'm glad I didn't, actually. But, this is about the nervous system, which has been hyper aroused. The sciatic nerve has been pressed upon, which could take years to deal with. And it's interesting so then I decided, well, if I'm going to retraining something, I was always interested in human performance in the body. And I'd had some interesting chats via treatment with some osteopaths that I'd seen. So I thought, well, okay, I'll redirect my energies into that. And it was humbling because I didn't have an academic background.
Yeah.
Particularly, I had to learn a new language. I had to learn I had to learn what it's like to be a civvy, because I had been institutionalized.
Yeah.
And sort of language, and I still struggle with this, Anthony. Sort of language and some things that I think are appropriate just aren't to people who aren't in that situation.
David, as a man that
it can be a brutal old place, man.
20 years working in the city with 95% men, I was the same. Where the stuff you said, people would not understand what you're talking about, and you realise that's not appropriate for talking in the general population. So I understand.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest thing. That was the biggest thing. I was coming into, so I got a place. So luckily, I managed to get a place at uni, and started studying an osteopath. But I'd be looking across at people who are fucking around in the lessons, and they're 18. They don't know any better. And I'm like thinking, why aren't you doing fucking press ups? Why aren't you fucking out there doing, you're running up and down until I say stop, or until the instructor says stop?
Yeah.
Or actually, why don't you just fuck off? Because I'm paying to be here. I was fucking furious, and I thought, hang on a minute, not everyone, they've come straight out of A levels. This is, and I kind of calmed down a bit, and I had to get my attitude right, because that was difficult. And also I was dealing with grief and I realize that now, that I was dealing with grief.
Because you were having to reinvent yourself.
Totally. I was having to come from like being a physical being who identifies strongly with being a rescue worker. Right. And someone at that one point, that crew that I worked with, you wanted us coming if there was a problem, but then to being in quite a academic, I wouldn't call it feminized, but very different, where it's all about your thoughts and all about your skills in that regard. And I had nothing to offer initially. I was lost, man. So I just threw myself into into, you know, the world of study. And actually, I have to say, through that, you know, and obviously I was motivated because I was trying to find answers to my own condition.
Yeah.
You know, I found that, you know, I had the ability to improve slowly, which is what I set about doing over the next 7 years. So I qualified and then started working in clinic. And so in clinic, I started to then work with two hats. So the clinician, osteopath, someone who has a deep understanding of pain, but also the person who's had experience of being and training people and, you know, thinking about functional fitness. And there was a real benefit to that, because actually the way I pulled myself out of needing morphine and gabapentin and, you know, looking at a one-way ticket to the surgeon's table, really, it was by reactivating, thankfully, some of the old pathways I'd laid down and re-strengthening, reconditioning, in effect, to form a natural brace, a natural girdle around which I could then function to a point. My rowing days were over.
Yeah.
My squat and, you know, axial compression of the spine days were over. My boxing days were over. To a point where I would think I'm a good performer. I still played around with it a little bit.
Yeah.
But those high performance days were over. But I think in terms of what I achieved in coming off the medication, reinvention, and then it's a cliche, but that does help me then talk to other people who have lost hope.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, because, you know, I was on a hospital bed with no hope.
Yeah.
Here I am, you know, speaking to you about these experiences, and I wouldn't say, well, I don't hate, but I sometimes roll my eyes when people say, oh, you know, my struggles and, you know, that experience had value because, you know, it helps other people. And I get that. I'd rather have not had that experience.
Yeah. Or I'll just leave
You
that
know,
one.
because it's still painful now. You know, I still have daily pain. You know, I still can't do certain things. But, you know, I can do a lot more actually than I would say the average person still. I still have the ability to enjoy myself and have that buzz and from physical activity still. It has informed what I do, and it has actually led me down a few paths. So there has been a positive, and I think it's because I think the most important thing for anyone in that situation who finds themselves in that situation is to keep going.
Yeah.
Because everything does pass. I mean, it's true, but everything will pass, and with time, most things do improve.
Well, I wondered
in terms of physical injury.
I wondered on that. Let's say to the average guy that's listening to this, who is probably in his mid to late 30s and upwards, and you know, I'll be 44 in a month's time, so I've kind of got enough friends around, you know, 5 years either side of my age who are interested in this. We wanted to talk about like strength preserving lifestyle choices, because I know there's so many, you know, that's probably an hour's podcast in itself. But let's say a guy comes in who's got some back pain or some issues. Kind of, what would be the go-to things that you'd say to kind of, you know, their lifestyle choices to kind of gain and preserve strength in the body?
Yeah, no one ever comes in and asks me that. But my first, whenever anyone comes in to my clinic and they're in that age category, I jump on them with that message. And I've been jumping on people with that message for 2 or 3 years now, and I'll come to why later. But the reason that I jump on people in that message with that message is because, irrespective of why they've come across to me, they might have come to me because they've seen some of my profile and actually want to get into it a little bit. But, you know, whether they like it or not, you know, I'm going to help your back out or your knee injury. I'll help you with that. But once that's better, this is what you need to be doing for the rest of your life. And strength preservation, and the reason I'm passionate about it is because I've been working with older people I'm on, you know, cross-party think tanks. I feed into a lot of the resources that are put out there for older people that are now being paid for by central government because of the worry about an aging population who are also detraining. We haven't got enough carers. Their quality of life is worse. You know, the grand challenge from the central government of improving the last 5 years of people's lives by 2035. I'm going to be one of those people in 2035. And I've been working on this stuff. And when I work with people like the Royal College of Nursing, or I work with the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, or, you know, I work with, you know, these think tanks and steering groups, we all know there's only so much you can do if you're asking someone to gain strength when they're 75.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, there's only so you can. Don't get me wrong, you can. But what could it have been if you'd have started at 55, 45 and carried on? And the reason I'm passionate about that is because all the research I've done into it, all the kind of, all the messaging coming out absolutely identifies that strength, muscular skeletal function, but skeletal muscle tissue really defines our older age.
Mm-hmm.
If you can hold on to it, it's a metaphor for the quality of your life.
Right.
It's not about aesthetics at that point. It's about, can you get on and off of the toilet? Because if you can't, you're going to need care of some sort, right? It's about immune function. Frailty and fracture happen because we don't pull our muscles against our bones enough when we hit a certain point in our life. So we get the double whammy of a hormonal drop off in middle age, and we get another whammy coming in of detraining because of non-use.
Yeah.
And you get people who fall and would potentially don't have to have a fracture, but they generally will have a fracture. People who die of colds and the flu. And it's because their immune system isn't working as well as it was when they were 50. And we think now, in fact, we know now that there's a relationship between our maintaining skeletal muscle tissue and our immune function. And a lot of people now are saying that, in terms of health promotion, that skeletal muscle is an immune organ in its own right.
Yep.
I think when we start recalibrating that message and thinking, dude, you're 45, you're 50, get on it now, because you can't be asking someone to build muscle meaningfully in a short space of time. You can do it, but here's the thing. Muscle is like, and it's not just muscle, it's a neuromuscular relationship. The activation pathways, the movement that we go through, and we drill certain movements. All those things lead to a fluency in movement, a fluency in activation. And without that, you can't learn it in a short space of time. You certainly can't ask someone who's older to learn it as well as they can learn it when they're middle-aged. And this is why I jump on people, because with a little bit of commitment to the longer view, what I call the long game, you can have, I believe there's an implicit relationship between your actions now and the next 20, 30 years with a bit of luck.
Yeah.
With a fair wind, we will have a bit of luck, but it's going to protect you. Taking up tennis, rambling, bowls, cycling, the things that people tend to do when they retire, is fantastic. But do some strength training as well.
Yeah.
Twice a week, 3 times a week, standalone activity. I include yoga in that actually, because yoga's hard if you do the right class, but I don't care what it is, but do some standalone resistance training, own body weight, water-based stuff if you can. Resistance bands, doesn't have to be weight training. Pull-ups, dips, they're the kings of gym anyway. You don't need, they're the kings of the gym. So do that and do it for the rest of your life. Because if you don't want to be regretting it. You don't want to be regretting it. And I think there's so many health messages coming out of COVID to do with why people did better, why people didn't do so well. And a lot of it's focused around physical activity. And physical activity has been overemphasized in terms of aerobic metabolic activity, metabolic health. Quite rightly, I guess, because we have got an obesity issue, we have got a heart disease issue, etc., etc. But we've also got a huge sarcopenia issue, which is what kills you in the end. This is what makes you frail. This is what drives that immune system to almost non-function. And the most modifiable thing we can do for ourselves is to engage that system, the musculoskeletal system, the neuromuscular system, and do it regularly. Because without it, I think we massively heighten the risk of not being able to do even the metabolic stuff.
Yeah. So
we talked briefly about some of the stuff that people like to do in terms of fitness, but everything comes from your ability, your baseline strength. Everything comes from that. There's your baseline. Work on that and do the other stuff around it. Do your running, do your cycling, do your swimming. Fantastic. Do the social stuff. Fantastic. But have your baseline. The baseline is a thing that hasn't been talked about. We have in this country, I think, something called a strength hesitancy, where you go to the gym when you're a youth or, early 20s, 30s, it's maybe an aesthetic vain thing. If you're in the services, it's more of a functional thing. It is also vain as well. I mean, come on, of course it is. But there's that functional element to it as well. And I think people, for whatever reason, it drops off when you get to middle age.
Yeah.
And people then say, "Oh, I'm going to take up Iron Man now."
We saw in the city, kind of some men fall into, there's different categories, but some men, fun enough, were the ones that suddenly decided to do the endurance events, and it became like anything else in life. People love addictions, don't they? So you're either addicted to drinking or addicted to this, and those guys are addicted to exercise, which I guess is a better addiction than some. But you also had some of the guys who, and I know some who would then kind of suffer from the dad bod because they have, they might have done some good fitness stuff when they were younger. And I always think when you are young, you can kind of outrun a bad diet a bit. But as you get older, so many guys then, as we know, testosterone drops off. Maybe they have kids, you don't sleep so well, and the gym seems to fall by the wayside. And I just wonder for you, is that one of those things as well? It's, for guys, it's trying to juggle everything else. They're spinning plates.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard message, Anthony, because it's the very time in your life when you're at your busiest. That's, that, it's kind of, you're juggling your career, your home life, and your personal life, your family life, all those things coalesce in middle age traditionally. And that's the very time when you don't want to be dropping off in terms of resistance training. It's kind of the perfect storm, really. And this is why this message is so important, because obviously all those other things are massively important. But if you had the gift of being able to say to a loved one or a friend, you need to do this for yourself. I want you to start doing this because when you're older, you're going to have independence, you're going to have resilience. You might be 85, 95.
Yeah.
But you're going to be metabolically, chronologically much younger. Your immune system, you won't have to be frightened like older people get frightened and hesitant and withdraw from life. You're going to have a full life.
Yeah.
Hopefully until a few days or a week before you die, without the need to be on medication. If you had that in your gift to give that to someone, I'm sure you would.
Priceless.
But we all do. Yeah. We all have that now within a gift to do it for ourselves, and then to tell the ones around us to do it. Because otherwise we are sleepwalking into a bit of a catastrophe. And I know it's not sexy because it's 30 years time.
Yeah.
But I'm in a situation where I'm in that cohort in which it matters. I have the knowledge and I'm trying to practice what I preach now, because I'm one of those people and I've just described what I want. I want that for the people around me that I care for, but I also want that for the people generally, because I think it'd be a happy society. But I also want that quite selfishly for me.
Yes. Yeah.
And I one of the inspirational people I've met actually was one of my patients, and I worked with her 15 years, and she died at 95. And she had a bit of luck. She obviously had a longevity gene, but she'd built up her strength and held on to it. She'd built up her strength through dance-related activities through her middle age, and she never stopped. She was still out and going to dance classes in her mid-90s. Yeah. And I would see her once a month, 15 years, just to straighten her out, deal with any problems, balance her out, and then just give her the message saying, keep going. I don't care if you're 95. I want you to keep doing your squats. I want you to keep doing your wall press ups, your banded exercises we had her on. And I got the message a few months ago that she passed away.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's upsetting because I'll miss her. She became a friend as well as a patient. And I learned a lot from her. And what she taught me was that's what I want. Okay. She died, she passed away peacefully in her own bed. She wasn't on any medication. She didn't have any care. She did exactly what she wanted to do until the day she died. And I think, I often reference that for people and say, I know it's a long way off. With a bit of luck, it's a long, long way off. But let's aspire to that. And there is, within our control, we can influence the chances of that quite powerfully, quite significantly. There's a lot of snake oil out there. There's a lot of longevity snake oil out there.
Yeah.
And one of the things we do know works is strength training, the right nutrition, the right mindset, the right elements within that strength training, actually to do with speed and activation, have massive benefits as well in terms, because what we realize that when we see a drop off in so power drops off 8 times faster than actual muscle mass as we age, right? So when we think about what power is, speed times strength. So it's the acceleration, deceleration, control, neural elements, neural subsystems of control around our joints and around our brain pathways to activate. If you had someone who's big but can't activate everything, they're no use to you. You come with someone who's wiry and activating fully, they're stronger than the bigger guy or girl. And this is my point. Neural activation exercises, neural balance exercises, visualization that actually engage the nervous system help us preserve our strength as well. And this is what I kind of put into programs for people who have a mindset to want to have that long game.
Yeah.
But it's a hamster wheel. It's a hamster wheel. You've got to get on that hamster wheel
and
then stay on it.
Sometimes trying to find, I love exercise. I love the gym. I love everything. I'd happily do it every day. And I used to get up very early, whereas your mates would think you were nuts if you got up at 5:30 to get to the gym, even if you did half an hour of some swimming and stuff. And that's often the problem. Some people say they just don't, they don't like doing exercise. And I guess in a way it's kind of like, well, maybe you will like living a fruitful life of longevity instead of being, I always think the words like weak and feeble when you're old. No one wants to be weak and feeble.
No, I think when you're one of those people, you've got to ask yourself what you do like then. What do you like? What do you like doing? Okay, do you want to do that forever?
Yeah.
Then invest an hour a week, 2 half-hour sessions. And I think we touched upon it, didn't we, last time, mate? I mean, I totally get it. It's hard to actually commit to something really regularly. And I think people, if they miss it for a few weeks or a month, they don't go back to it. You should always go back. And even if you've done, there's some quite recent research out that was talking about something called strength snacking, which actually says that, even if you haven't got the time or the mindset to want to do a standalone session, a little bit here and there, 5 minutes here, 1 week at the end of 1 week, another, even a minute, just do a set of press ups against the wall, some banded exercises.
Yeah.
If you get it into your routine, will actually pay dividends. There's a really good scene from one of the later Rocky films where he comes out the back of his house. I think it's when I don't know if it's Creed. Anyway, he comes out the back of his house. He's lost all his money, and there's a pull-up bar there.
Yeah.
He just comes out and he kind of does a few pull-ups. He gets in his van and drives off to the restaurant. I thought, yes,
perfect.
Exactly. Actually, he's demonstrating there what we put things in place where you can just walk past. Oh yeah, come on then, let's just do it, because not everyone loves it.
I tell you what,
fall out of love with it.
This is one of the big things from my nearly 20 years working in the city, is that companies weren't interested in your wellness and well-being back then. They didn't give a fuck about it, basically. And whereas now, I know if I had an office, I would be, I'd probably have a couple of rebounders, I'd have a pull-up bar and maybe something. So people could, if they are in the office a lot, they could still jump, like you say, strength snack or just movement snacks, just to go and jump on things. Even if you're on Zoom calls, you could still maybe sit on an exercise bike or something, if you're not, you don't have to be sprinting, just to keep moving instead of just sitting on your arse all day.
Oh man. Yeah, we're not meant to, we all know that. We're all meant to be doing that. We all line in, we're now channeled into roads, trains, pathways, and it's all linear. And we're not linear. We evolved to be multi-directional, upright, exploration organisms. And we're out there. That's why we survived, I think. And I think the office thing, they're slowly turning onto it. People are starting to talk about walking meetings, and I fully support that. But the office is, I would say it's a health risk. Yeah. The old school office environment is, I would say it's a health risk if you don't have some adaptation in there, like a TRX or the ability to have a shower in the office. You can cycle into work at least and have a shower.
Yes.
So you get something in. But
just a little bit.
Yeah, it is a little bit. But I think it's also training clever, because you no doubt heard this a million times, work hard, play hard. I'm going to rinse myself, pain is weakness leaving the body, all that bullshit. It isn't. Pain is pain. Pain means something. Don't ignore that. To actually keep an eye on that. because otherwise you're coming to see me quite soon, you know. And I think you've got to, as you get older, I think you've got to train clever. You've got to be your expert on yourself. You know what your body. We all have different shapes. We have different morphotypes. We have different things that we gravitate towards in terms of body shape and body mass. And we all know when we're at a healthy weight.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really do BMI and stuff like that. I think, you know, I've got a pair of trousers, right? That's my BMI. I've got a pair of trousers that I keep. I don't wear them out. I've got a pair of trousers that I got when I was about 35. If I can get into those trousers,
yeah,
I'm in shape.
Yeah.
And if they're a bit tight, then I think, fuck, you know, the trousers don't lie, man.
That's
it.
it.
So, okay, I got to kind of just change my shape a bit down to a bit more like that, as opposed to like that.
The trousers don't give a fuck.
Trousers don't lie. Mirror doesn't lie. Trousers don't lie.
So there's the key for guys: is find some trousers for when you're in your best shape, and basically stick with it. Well, jumping onto that, I mean, I know we could talk about all these different issues, but let's talk about leadership, because I think for guys, I'm changing my stance in my seat, but for a lot of guys, you know, leadership is one of those things that doesn't necessarily get taught to us as we're growing up, and I think it's something that men should. We always talk about thought-provoking content, but listen to different people, different guys in different positions, to learn more about how to lead other people, or even kind of lead yourself and your family. So, you know, give us your thoughts on that, especially because you've gone through the Fire Brigade, which is very regimented, and then kind of gone out on your own, as it were.
I think on leadership, I think it's always got to start from oneself, in terms of the old cliches, and don't ask someone to do something you're not prepared to do yourself.
Yes.
And, you know, that one thing that I think says that most of the lessons that I've learned have been confirmed by that during my fire service days. And, you know, I've also been involved with medical teams, pitch side injury triage and things like that, which, you know, I've had to take a leadership role in, and applied quite similar things. You've got your hands dirty as leader. I think what some leaders find difficult is to be able to step back when you get to a certain level of seniority in whatever endeavor you are in. Certainly within any uniform service, I think that's an issue, because although you want to see what's going on, you've also got to then detach and step back and be objective, and not at that point. But I think if the thing about the fire service is that everyone's gone through that, it's a meritocracy. You work your way up from the lowest rank. So everyone has an understanding of what they are asking the lowest rank to do. Yeah. Even if you're the chief, you know what that means, because you've worked your way right up through. And there's something in that, there's a value to that I think is very special. Because you do whatever you decide. Even if you don't decide to go for promotion, leadership can also be mentoring. So if you're a senior leading firefighter or senior firefighter, and you've been given what we call the junior people junior bucks, well, they did do. So you got the buck kind of to look after. And, you know, I was in a pretty toxic first environment when I was posted out, and I was in an environment where there'd been no churn of personnel for about 10 years, and that's unhealthy.
Yes, no fresh.
And I was landed into that as a really fresh-faced young guy thinking, this is great. And everyone was like, it was a bit odd. It was just a bit strange. It was a bit strange. It was, you know, there was a lot of there was no teaching going, there was no mentoring going on. There was no one really to look up to. And I think I referenced it earlier in our chat that when I was up in Oxford Street a few weeks ago, I was taken right back to an incident that happened, and that incident said everything about poor leadership to me. Right. And that we turned up to a scaffolding lorry, early hours of it was about 6 a.m. on a Saturday. The scaffolding lorry had run over a cyclist. Right. And we got there, and the cyclist, she was lovely. She was still alive. I don't know how, but she was a nurse, and we were there waiting for the ambulance to turn up, and the station officer said, right, we need to try and make it more comfortable, and said, Dave, under you go. You know, and I was 19 at that point, and to send me under, you know, when there are these other more senior experienced personnel and officers. And actually one guy actually offered to come with me, which is great. Reg came with me, and thank God he did. But, you know, so Reg said, you know, you speak to her, I'm going to try and deal with it. And, you know, it was awful under there. I won't go into it, but it was just something you couldn't believe she was still alive. And I was having a conversation with her.
Yeah.
And I remember we made it as comfortable as we could. We had to detach the bike from her without going into details. And, you know, it was obviously she was ebbing and flowing out of consciousness, but she wasn't in any pain, thankfully. We had a paramedic had got a line of morphine into her. But I was chatting to her. It was a real privilege to spend that time speaking to her, because I was probably one of the last people to speak to her.
Yeah.
And I was able to kind of speak to her family afterwards. And I was 19. And I think, as an older guy now, I remember coming out from underneath the scaffold lorry when our job was done. I looked across at the rest of the crew who had assembled about 10 feet over there, and none of them could look me in the eye.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, that's a bit weird. And years later, Reg said, I'll never forget how you looked that morning. You know, I was completely white.
Yes.
And for me, leadership would have been not sending me under, but send the experienced guys. The station officer's going to go under.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we're going to debrief it. That's leadership.
Yeah.
Because everyone who signs up for that sort of role has got to be prepared to do things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So my point being, when I got opportunity to be a mentor later on and to be a junior officer later on, there's no way that was happening. You know, they were going to get supported. And I'm still thankfully really good friends with a guy called Andy, who I like to think I took under my wing and gave him the benefit of the conversations that I never had.
Yeah.
And I think that's when you can lead, when you can think, okay, well, it wasn't given to me, but what would I have liked to have heard?
Yeah.
As a young guy or young girl at that point, I was able to have that conversation. So when I was talking to Andy, who, you know, years and years later, I was kind of talking to myself as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it was kind of, this was a bit of closure for me to making something good happen, because the worst thing would be for me to become an embittered, you know, senior guy who then thinks, fuck it, I'm not going to look after anyone either.
Yeah.
I think leadership is about breaking those negative cycles, because we all have experiences like that in our lives. And I think the key, be that in personal lives where we didn't have a parental role model, or, you know, where you have things that are really shit that happen to you and there's no one there to really kind of help you out. You know, but I think if you're in a position when it then happens later, and you're in a position of authority, it's a hugely healing process.
Yeah.
And it comes back to my initial suggestion that, you know, you've got to be prepared to do these things yourself as a leader, and you've got to be prepared to get your hands dirty. And I think also just acknowledging your own kind of your own humanity within that uniform, if you're in a uniform, or within that role, because we're not robots. You know, it doesn't matter what your title is, you're still a human being. Yeah.
It's a good reminder, because you know, I'd wager that a good percentage of the guys listening to this maybe have you know, staff or people, I call it under them, you know, doesn't mean they're lower than them, but maybe lower ranking in the company. And I always think it is that important thing of realizing, because I've reflected back on when I worked at some companies, and I had some real fucking assholes who were like, didn't help me at all. I was going to use another word that rhymes with hunts, but that I felt, like you said, it created an odd atmosphere and an uncomfortable and unpleasant one. And I don't think there's anything positive that comes out of that at the time.
No.
So it's a good reminder to sometimes look around and be like, you know, like you said, what are your actions? How are they creating an environment? And how are you helping the youngsters? Because they're the ones that need the most steering and the most kind of, you know, nurturing, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, a toxic environment, you're absolutely right. That's a great point. I mean, a toxic environment is like a virus, isn't it? That it will spread and spread to the next generation, the next generation. The best thing to do is just nip that in the bud. As I said, you know, if I was giving a piece of advice to someone who wasn't particularly happy in their team, whatever that team is, then try and move along if you can. You know, try something different, try a different role, see how that feels, because you're never going to change that toxic environment from the inside as a junior member of the team. It's got to be changed via senior leadership, and sometimes you can waste 5 or 10 years or a career trying to change the toxic environment, then you suddenly realize you're part of it.
Yeah.
So my advice would be, life's too short, do a sideways move. And if you still find yourself in a weird toxic environment, it's probably you, but that's okay. But own it, and, find your way, but don't waste your time in a toxic team. Because when you actually strike gold and you find that, you probably found this, when you move to a different team, oh, that's better, this is a relief. I thought everyone was an arsehole. Actually, no, it was just them who were arseholes. And these people are really great. Life is good. Actually, I really want to come to work.
Yeah.
Do it. Because when you strike gold, there's nothing better. You're not working for a living suddenly. You're just enjoying that part of the life that you're getting paid for.
Do you know, you said that there, I think it's a game changer, or it's priceless when you work in the right team. And I've worked in teams that were not right at all. And I was, every morning you didn't want to go to work. And then you swap to somewhere where it was a great group. And suddenly the whole world is sunshine and rainbows again. And you're
it's the best.
Yeah.
It's the best. You get that shit. It's like a bad relationship, man.
Yeah. Yes. That's another podcast in itself. Well, look, I know we're coming to the end of the interview because we've gone down some good paths here, but I often reach out to some guys. I tell them who I'm going to have on the podcast and what have you. And one of the guys asked a question about what was the most fun thing about being in the fire service?
The best thing was, I think we actually, I made the Evening Standard that evening, so we got a wrist lap, but we were stationed I was stationed around Chelsea and Kensington, and one night it was London Fashion Week, and there was a fire alarm went off, and it happened to be the backstage of one of the major design shows, and we were invited to join the after party, and the station officer very kindly said, "You've got half an hour, lads, off you go," and we made the most of it.
It sounds terrible.
But unfortunately, we got snapped. It was a good PR for the London Fire Brigade, but we got snapped. I think it was Evening Standard, dancing away. Just half an hour. Obviously, we had our radios. We would have responded. And actually, before anyone says anything, we probably would have got to that incident faster because we weren't in the station. We were out. So just defending it 25 years later. Yeah. But that was pretty cool. That was, I've got several stories, but that's the only one I can really tell you.
I was going to say, I'm sure, after speaking to several firefighters or ex-firefighters, that they always say it's like you could do your own an evening with and just recount the kind of crazy stories. A bit like with work in the city. I've had people say to me, well, what was it like? And you're like, well, how long have you got? Because you realise the more you think about it, I'm sure for you also, was it part of the camaraderie of having, I guess also back then, what percentage of your kind of the overall team was men? Would you say it was 90%, 95%?
95%.
Yeah.
I'm probably higher than 95%. I mean, it's very much changed now. I mean, because you've got to understand that I've been out now for, I think nearly 20 years. So it's very much different now. And I'm quite right, because again, I think there needs to be diversity in teams. You need to be hearing different points of view. You do. You need different experiences, different diversity, and that includes different sexes. And I fully support that, as long as whoever that person, male, female, or whatever, can do the job.
Capable, yeah.
Then I haven't got a problem.
Yeah.
I mean that. I was a PTI doing fitness tests, and I wouldn't care what your gender was. Just can you do that task?
Yeah.
Done.
Can you save someone?
But yeah, exactly. But I think the camaraderie, that's something that.
Or did you miss that? I know it's a long time ago now, but I've spoken to a lot of guys again who've come out of different things and suddenly been working for themselves. And I've said I miss it. I said it today on an email. I miss being in that environment with, forgetting whether it's men, women, but a big group of people. There's loads of energy, lots of banter, laughter, stupid behavior, drinks and stuff. And then suddenly when you work on your own, it's like your world shrinks a lot.
There was a lot of grief around leaving, and I still have to deal with that because I joined in my very formative years, and I think a lot of soldiers probably experience this. You tend to join these services when you're a youth, and it's formative. And how can that not impress upon the rest of whatever else you do? I still identify as a firefighter, but I've done so many other things. You know, I've got so many other kind of strings to my bow. But if you were to ask me, what do you identify? That's me.
Yeah,
that's me, and that's hard. But you know, there was a blessing there, because I've gone on to do other stuff, and I wouldn't have taken those, even the bad experiences away. But yeah, that's I think everyone deals with that differently. I don't miss when it goes wrong. I don't miss the sleepless nights. I don't miss the risk to life, because I'm not mad. Now I'm out, I think, you know, got away with quite a few near misses. And I wouldn't want to be in that position now. Again, benefit of hindsight, being a father, you know, and actually dealing with injuries as a professional now. You then think, yeah, that's pretty gnarly what I did there, but you know, fuck, it was good. You know, I came through it. You need a bit of that, you know. I think you need a bit of adrenaline and excitement as a young dude, and thankfully I came through it uninjured, to the point where I was able to still live a normalish life. I was injured in such a way that ended my career, but I can't take that away, can't change history, so move on. And actually, you know, I'm enjoying it's good to talk about it. You know, I think talking is good, and you know, that's why I like your message, because it's good to talk about it. So if whatever it is, I guess, you're doing, and if you are transitioning out of a role or a job that you're a bit lost, that's normal. You know, hopefully, you know, the message in this is that of course you're going to miss it. Be a bit weird if I didn't, but
that's why,
because it was intense
when we were with the
but
group.
I wouldn't say I'd want to go back to that now. Someone says, you do it again, I say, yeah, maybe not.
And also I was thinking, the old saying of never go back, it will never be the same as it was. You know, I know guys in the city who still work there, and you know, if you talk to them, and we'll reminisce about the good stuff that used to happen, and then they'll say, do you know what, you know, certain things have changed and it's just not the same anymore, and it's not as much fun. And a lot of that comes from new regulations that stop you taking clients out, and you have to tick every box and all the bullshit that goes with it. And I just look and I'm like, I always think I left at just about the right time, certainly for me, but you know, think the game was changing. So well, it's been good. And also, I know you're off on holiday soon.
I am.
When you're away, do you exercise if you're off for like 2 weeks, or do you just relax?
No, I'm a nightmare. My fiance hates it. I just can't sit still. I'm an absolute nightmare. I'll try this time, because it's been 2 years since anyone's had a holiday. So this one I'm going to try. Going to lovely Greek island, so I can't wait. You know, so no, there's a gym. I mean, you know, a lot of guys probably identify with this. Got to make sure there's a gym at the hotel, right? Which I've done.
I think that's it. I don't mind sitting down for a few days, but then I start to get a bit kind of jittery, where I want to go and burn off some energy or something like that. So yeah. Well,
I've got to practice what I preach.
Got
to practice what I preach. Can't just, you know, that's like I've set myself up now, haven't I? So I've just got to crack on with it.
Well, if anyone listening sees David whilst he's on holiday and he's not working out, I want
great
some evidence. But well, I appreciate. I mean, it's been great to connect, and also just to listen to your kind of thought-provoking stories, which is always, I think, part of the Whole Man Academy and the podcast is bringing guys on that someone might not have either heard of, or would probably their paths might not have crossed. And hopefully there's some good golden nuggets there. And again, we're always trying to put on different events, either online or in person, in probably in London. So hopefully at some point our paths will cross for a man hug, and you can assess my bad back.
Well, first thing I'll ask you is, are you still doing your strength? That's the first thing I'll be on you for. So, but yeah, that'd be good, mate. Yeah, I'd love to meet up in person and, you know, meet some of the other guys from the academy. Yeah, no, we were saying the connections that have grown through the podcast are impressive, to be honest. But I will let you go. I appreciate all your time, and I will speak to you soon. Cheers, man. It's been a pleasure. Thanks. Thank you, David. Thanks for listening. Remember to sign up to our game-changing weekly e-letter that's read by men around the world. Sign up at wholemanacademy.com/movement. Until next time.